Hey, what's up, everybody? Your guest host, Bobby Del Rio. You've got Entertainment 411. You are in for a special treat. We've got Tim and Quinn Bogart, and their new project, Juliet and Romeo, is going to blow your mind. Let's just start with the trailer, and then we'll get them on. Can't wait.
I saw you. You were fighting with the Montagues.
And you? Juliet, daughter of Capulet.
They say the world is spinning round, but you come along and time slows down.
I should properly introduce myself. I'm
Romeo.
I knew that my heart would never beat the same.
Did you not see the look in her eyes? She's changed. It takes a mother to know.
Are you kidding me? A Montague and a Capulet would set the world on fire.
She's not our enemy. Of course she is.
It's like my heart's on fire. So dangerous, so dangerous.
We're to be married. It's been decided.
Not by me.
When every secret I'm trying to keep is dangerous.
Do you trust me?
Jump!
Just 'cause I'm falling, I don't even know. I'm falling in love.
Montague. It's a good name.
In a different life, maybe love could be your only guide, just not in this one.
I'd rather die than live without her.
I'm more than the crown I wear. And we're with a
You will stand with this family, or you'll stand alone.
I'm more than the role I play.
You will be the Capulet you've been raised to be.
This mask I wear.
We're running out of time.
Talk, time is
You're playing with life and death.
This isn't how our story ends, I promise you that.
I'm sure that Romeo knows that tonight I dreamt him.
What now?
It's a mystery.
Juliet and Romeo. Looks amazing. Without further ado, we've got Tim and Quinn Bogart.
Thank you, Bobby. Such a pleasure. All I could see over the trailer is like the set, all the cuts. Like how many times are we getting it right? I don't know.
Spoken like a true director. Although I'm pretty sure you're not the writer.
I am.
Familiar. Oh,
I took I wrote it, but one would be remiss in thinking about the origin text,
right.
Because that's pretty important. You're exactly right. Mr. Shakespeare gave us everything.
Oh yeah, but I mean it's a musical and it's so interesting. Let's get there. Let's start with your individual bios and then your relationship, because I thought that's really interesting. Then we'll get into the interview. So if we could start with you, Tim, that would be great. Just tell us.
Sure. So yes, I'm Tim Bogart, and I'm the writer and director of the film. And you'll meet in a moment Quinn Bogart, who shockingly has a similar last name. So just so happens to be my daughter. And so for any parent, I think, in the world to be able to spend time and work with their child is quite something. To work with someone as talented as my kid was really next level for me. And we'll get to that in a minute. But
yeah, it's either a dream or a nightmare. It's one of the two.
Probably a dream for me and a nightmare for the kid, but we'll let her talk about that.
Otherwise, these interviews separately. I know that.
Right, exactly. Right. You might need to do that to isolate us. But yes, to answer your question, Bobby, interestingly, the origin story, a little bit of me as a creator, it really does dovetail directly into the movie, because I actually began my career as a theater director. Actually, I began my career as a theater actor, as a musical theater actor, which I adored doing until one day I was actually doing Jesus Christ Superstar, and I was playing Judas, and I was in the middle of my big death scene in rehearsals, and I was up on a thing with ropes and all that stuff, and suddenly the director decided there should be 15 dancers in front of me while I was doing this big death scene. I remember going to the director going, why are we doing that? And they couldn't answer the question. I remember literally thinking so clear at the moment, I got to do that job. And that show was the last with me as a performer. And I moved on to directing. And the first things I directed was some Shakespeare plays, and Romeo and Juliet was among them. I think ultimately I think I directed it on the stage 4 times. And I like to say, because it's true, I feel I failed every one of them. I don't know that I ultimately got what I wanted out of the text. And part of that was the journey, because there were such incredible themes. I so connected with them instantly. And yet there were characters and relationships and dynamics that I felt that the play just didn't. It's not that the text specifically didn't do it. It's just the play didn't have time for it. So something you're looking at the parents and the families and going, I bet there's a lot more there. And that just sort of stuck with me for years and years as I moved into film and television, thinking, I think I didn't pull that off. And one day I wish I could. And that literally kind of haunted and daunted me for probably the next decade and a half or so. And I moved into film and television and really spent most of my career in the independent space, running around the world in crazy places, shooting in crazy places. But this one kept coming back as something that I just thought, I'm so impacted by his work, Mr. Shakespeare's always. I'm so impacted by the themes of Romeo and Juliet, which I think arguably, maybe with the exception of the Bible, I don't know any more well-known text or story than Romeo and Juliet and these two characters. I think they're probably, other than the Bible, truly the most well-known in history. So, boy, that's daunting. But there's a reason why it's performed every day in every city, in every state, in every country around the world. And that stuck with me from a very young, hope for artist that I was at the beginning, to ultimately about 10 years ago when I finally felt I got the idea of what I wanted to do. And we can talk about that separately. But moving on to this kid down below, the only thing I will say to preface that is Juliet and Romeo was by far the largest production I have ever directed. I mean, I've directed, hundreds of crew members. This is something 400 people in the middle of Italy, in the middle of the night, in cold, with horses and daggers and fire and madness. And I knew going into it, even though we had 4 months to shoot, that it was going to be unbelievably challenging to pull all this off. And I had always been reluctant, or maybe reluctance is not the word. I never was fully comfortable with the second unit, because I always felt, people kind of leave stuff for second unit. Oh, the second unit will clean up. What do you mean second unit will clean up? That's your movie. Like, that's every frame is part of your movie. So to turn that over to someone was always something I just had a challenge doing. And yet in this film, I knew from the jump I was never going to be able to get it all within the time frame that we had. So I was going to need to rely on something, on a really robust second unit. And as I was sitting there in Italy at the very beginning of pre-production going, who on earth can I trust? It just so happened that my daughter, Quinn Bogart, who had done second unit for me, more kind of, B-roll shots and close-up insert shots on a prior film, but I had such an incredible experience with her. And in the intervening years, she had gone to NYU and become, she had been an unbelievable writer from the beginning, the moment she started actually typing. But I had watched her progress as a director, doing shorts herself, and then ultimately doing second unit for me. And I called her up, and probably in the worst parenting move in the history of parenting moves, said, hey, how'd you like to drop out of school for the year? Wow. She was attending NYU Film School. I said, come to Italy with me, be there at literally every meeting, so there's not a single thought or word that comes into my mind that doesn't also go into yours, so that you are so well versed in the language of the film we're trying to make. And then I'm going to give you a 50-person crew for the next 4 months, and we're going to pull this thing off. And there are sequences in the film that I just know I never would have gotten into this movie without this remarkable young filmmaker. So I'll turn that over to her, but that's how Quinn ultimately got involved.
Wow, it's an incredible story, and your background. And I'm also a theater guy. I'm a Shakespeare trained actor, so I'm very curious to see your journey from theater to film, and you also made it a musical. We've had a lot to talk about, but let's get to you, Quinn, because also, for your dad to trust you with this, that says a lot about you. But let's talk about you. How did you get started, and just let's get a little bit of background on you.
Yeah, so similarly wonder why I began as well acting and doing musical theater. Although my father has always been one to say, just make sure that if you're going to commit to this, you're truly committing, because there's a lot of no's before you get the yeses. and I kept wanting to be a part of this industry and keep creating. And eventually I kind of had a similar moment, I believe, where I was like, I wanted to have a little bit more agency in the stories I was telling. And the first thing I actually ever directed was to one of the main songs of this film when I was about 9 years old. I used my dolls and I called it the Montagues and Kenulets. And
wow. And we've got a clip from that, and we're going to show it right now.
Okay.
By the way, we can give you that clip. That's hysterical.
But it was the first time that I'd ever truly tried to tell my own story. And it was quite exciting that I got to use a story or a piece of the story that my family had been working on. My uncle, Evan Bogart, was the one who was writing it, along with a truly incredible team. And so I've been listening to these songs since I was about 9 years old, and this was the first script that I'd ever read. I did not quite realize that he had an important meeting later that day and snuck it out of my dad's backpack and got a very frantic call when I was at school because I had taken it, I think, when I was around 11 and fully read through it for the first time. And so it's been...
These are the days when paper mattered, right? Remember that? There was a thing called paper.
Yes. No, and it's been quite an exciting journey to just have these songs ringing in my head since I was a kid. And finally getting to work with, as incredible as my dolls were, working with these actors was beyond a dream come true, and getting to do it with my family. And there's something I think to be said about the fact that as much as I do find myself to be an independent storyteller and have my own voice and my own vision, all of my initial instincts came from watching my dad. And so seeing, I think, a lot of the core of second unit work as well. And one of the things that makes it so complicated is trying to keep it being the main unit director's vision. And I think there is part of my vision that has just grown from his. So I think it made that part of the job quite a lot easier. And he's the one who taught me how to write a script the first time, how to operate a camera. So I think that definitely helped along the way. And I don't think either of us were quite prepared for the scale of how much I was going to end up shooting. I had done a project previously. I think this was while I was still at NYU Tisch Film and TV, same program he went to. During that, you let me direct second unit for the other film, and it was absolutely incredible, but it was much more inserts and close-ups of hands and smaller things. Still the biggest opportunity I'd had at that point. But having graduated, this one called me. I didn't even realize he was in Italy yet, and said, I need my second unit. And we had both prepared for me to do pickups of things along the way because we knew it was going to be big, but I don't think we realized how big it was going to grow while we were there. And I am incredibly lucky that I got to shoot some very important sequences that I'm really proud of, and learning all of that vision from him has been truly incredible.
Oh, I can I ask how old you were when you
19.
And how old are you now?
21, turning 22 in May.
Oh my God. I mean, it's incredible, but I also hate myself. So that's my fault. That has nothing to do with you. But I'm just joking, just a little bit. It's pretty amazing what you're doing individually and together as a family. Let's talk a little bit about the project itself, and then we'll get into your process and how you guys work together, because I mean, it's just so fascinating how you've been able to put this together. Also, the trailer looks amazing. And I know Romeo and Juliet very well, and then I was like, "What? It's a musical and so well shot." Let's talk about Juliet and Romeo. Why did you invert the names in the title, and just tell us a bit about the project?
Sure. So first of all, the title thing is funny. I originally named the film, and it had been so for many, many, many years, Verona. And part of the reason for that was because we wanted to present a much broader world than we had seen before of pure Romeo and Juliet, because we thought there was so much more story to mine and so much more interesting places potentially to go beyond the confines of the text. So it was Verona for quite a while. And then as we started talking about actually getting this out to the world and making sure people knew what the movie was, we started just kind of testing things and checking with things. And a bunch of people were like, Verona the city, like they weren't connecting it with Romeo and Juliet. So then for a while we changed it to Verona's Romeo and Juliet. And so that kind of wordy as well. So we kept kind of going through this idea of, and we'll get into more specifics of the story, but this is intended and always has been to be a story that you think you know, a story that you are familiar with. And again, these characters in this world are among the most fascinating characters in perhaps all of history. But the idea of going back to pure Romeo and Juliet also felt wrong. So we kept going, well, that will tell people it's Romeo and Juliet, but then what differentiates it? We were struggling. And I actually was sitting there during post-production, and I, for whatever reason, and I don't know why, had the files on my computer. And so I'm actually working with it on the computer, just kind of playing with the Romeo and Juliet. And I don't know why, but I happened to accidentally just transpose the words. And the moment I saw that, I was like, huh, if I actually brought it up on the screen that said Romeo and Juliet and then switched to Juliet and Romeo, well, that's pretty darn cool. So I then presented that to other people, and everyone thought that's a great way to say, remember the story that you think you know? It's that, but also it's different. So that was the title, which was a separate thing than the creation ultimately of the I guess the character herself. You know, I think you can tie that together, and that makes a lot of sense. But ultimately, Shakespeare, if you look at the actual text for any play, it's a very sparsely written thing. Even the character descriptions or the blocking is rather sparse, because I believe Shakespeare always intended adaptation to be the thing. They were poems to some degree. I mean, obviously they were a text of play, but he really was someone who was creating these ideas and these themes that ultimately I believe he believed would ultimately be adapted. It's interesting when we talk about adaptation in general. You know, some Shakespearean purists, of which I would say I'm kind of one of, to be honest, but some Shakespearean purists would sort of point out, gosh, you know, the real ages from the text seem to be 13 or 14, and you've made them sort of older. And while that may be true, I think people forget that in the year 1301, when the story takes place, the average lifespan was 30, right? So if you're 14 years old, you're halfway through your life. Even in Shakespeare's time, and we believe it was written probably around 1594, 1595, the view of women's rights, the view of the world was also quite different. And so I believe fully, had Shakespeare written the play today, and by the way, and even in Shakespeare's time, life expectancies were 40, not 80. So I think by the time you get to this moment, you know, it's interesting with my daughter, who, even though she was quite young at 9 or 10 when I started writing this, I would share with her the script. And certainly more interesting when she became 14, 15, 16, 17 than perhaps when she was 10. But ultimately she would say, gosh, I wouldn't say that. I don't think I would believe that. My friends wouldn't understand that. And so as an adaptation, I thought it was crucial to take these unbelievable themes that Shakespeare had created, but place them in this moment, at this time. And how would we need to reflect those ideas into this adaptation? And I would just argue, even, you know, Baz Luhrmann, it's not like he said, I'm going to do the text as written. He changed it to Venice, California, modern day, not Venice, Italy. You know, horses became cars, swords became guns. It's always been something to adapt. What I always found most fascinating about this particular play is that of all of Shakespeare's work, I actually think this is the most of all his work, because it's the most specifically geared towards a younger audience. Most of his stuff is geared towards an older audience. And so as a result of that, I believe he created an unbelievable place to leap off from, but it was our job to apply it to the modern times. And so when you think about this character of Juliet, who does have more agency, she's not passive, which is written more often in the text as a passive character. She's a very proactive woman. And not only for the play's adaptation into this movie, the world I was trying to create, but also as a father with a daughter, I wanted her to see that as well. And so the adaptation is critical, but the understanding, I think, ultimately why adapting, why we did it, I think is really important to understand some of those decisions we made.
Look, your passion and knowledge, you know, for Shakespeare and Romeo and Juliet is infectious. And it seems like obviously your daughter's also picked it up. So Quinn, let's get over to you. And, you know, I say you took a break, you went to the green room.
So sorry, difficulties. I have borrowed another laptop.
Oh, it's okay. I figure you just directed another feature film. You're so in demand now that
I was just running off really quick. No, my apologies, but I'm back now and everything's fixed.
Well, let's talk about your experience with Orange, your take on the project. Like, what's your perspective on Juliet and Romeo?
Yeah, again, maybe because I have grown up alongside this story and seeing it grow as I did. There is something really special to be said about the fact that this is a love story of generations, and you're always sort of told as a young woman and as a young man that this is the romance to sort of look up to. And I've never truly been able to, I think as incredible as the story was, as my father had said previously, people were a different age back then because people died younger. The things that we have to do to make it so that audiences can relate currently, I think it did have to be modernized a little bit for a more modern woman. And I think I'm finally able to see my version of Juliet, or the person that I think I can see myself in a little bit. She's messy and makes mistakes, but the mistakes are hers to make. And she has agency in what she's doing and the life that she's sort of living. There's a moment in it, especially I think when it comes to the physical romance between the two, just the sort of unspoken moment of consent where it's her that has the agency and is making that move. And it's not just following the sort of older man as it once was, because it would have been at the time. But I don't think being told as a young woman that I should be looking up to these characters for romance, I never personally was able to relate to that form of love, because I don't feel like she was challenging him enough and all of that. I know that I can't personally be that passive, whether that's a positive or negative thing, but I do quite love seeing this version of it. It's still their love story, but she has far more agency than I've seen before. And just exploring the realm of the characters around them in a way where the tragedy you feel for all of these characters, I think, has become a lot more intense personally, especially as it relates to the women in the world, because we are exploring their struggles a little bit further. And so there's something very special about getting to expand on the story that we all know very well to be slightly more tangible for at least an audience such as myself.
So look, I don't want to insult my own family, but I do think you're the smartest father daughter family I've ever seen in my life. I'm like, what are your conversations like? The breakfast table. Let's get into, on set.
Yeah.
And I'd made this joke before we started shooting, how, or maybe I said it on air, I don't remember, how, when you work with family, it's a risk, right? It's one of those things that it could be maybe the greatest experience, the greatest bonding experience, or it could be the thing that tears you apart. So it says a lot about you that, you're both here at the interview, but also you're so I can see how in sync you are. And I can see, Tim, why you would ask Quinn, because some people are going to be like the nepotism thing. They're going to roll their eyes. This is a thing that happens. But talking to Quinn and seeing your interplay, it's very obvious. This is the right person. There's a shorthand between you. There's an understanding. There's a depth of intellect. Can you talk a bit about the dynamic between the two of you making this thing together?
For sure, and thank you for all of what you just said about our relationship and our ability to communicate. I would combat the nepotism comment by saying that's correct. It is nepotism, and in this case, it's because the person who happens to be my kid is probably the most trustworthy person that I know would have my best interest at heart. Ultimately, the film as a result of that, because that would be my best interest. And so, yes, nepotism, but also yes, nepotism. And so to that extent, I think there's an enormous truth to being able to trust somebody implicitly in a world that it's very hard to trust anybody. And in a film production, which is the weirdest thing, right? There's hundreds of people who have been put together in this strange place, and they've all got their thing. They think they know the movie, but it's a complicated thing to kind of figure out. I would say on top of all that, the complexity of this particular production, as hard as it was because it's just so big, add to that COVID, which again, at this point, it's we shot at the end of 2022 into 23. And then of course we got stuck with the writers and the strike and all the rest of that, which put us off for a year. But during that process, while people weren't getting sick the way they had been prior, right? You're still under, the Screen Actors Guild rules and regulations. If someone gets sick, that's it. We had a rolling bout that was being transferred from various people. So every single day, no matter what call sheet we would put out the day before, in the morning, Quinn, myself, our director of photography, Byron Warner, our incredible first AD, Reed Dunlop, would sit together and go, well, now what? Who do we have today? Who's available today? How are we doing that whole sequence with only one of the two critical characters? And we would literally have thought about it, planned about it, considered it all the day before, throw it all out basically on the ride to set as we're learning who's actually available. And then Quinn and I really would sit there and say, okay, here's what we have. Here's what we're doing on the first half of the day. Here's what we're doing the second half of the day. Good luck. You've got this actor for these 12. Oh, by the way, greatest thing on earth, I think, for any parent, for any human to be able to direct Sir Derek Jacobi would be like the opportunity of a lifetime. To watch your child direct Sir Derek Jacobi is about the proudest thing you can ever get to. So ultimately, the crucial component of this relationship was communication. And it was also ultimately last minute communication, arriving on the set, changing everything, and it only works if our direct understanding of each other and the goals was so clear. So we would literally divvy up the day, figure out what elements we had to play with, and divvy out the resource of, okay, you take the crane then. Okay, well, I'll take this. I'll take the dolly. And that was how we literally did it every day for 43 days.
You know, it's incredible, and the way you speak about each other with such respect, but also there's professionalism that, you know, you don't. I mean, forget about the father-daughter thing. Just like generally, you don't always hear people who collaborate so closely speak about each other so positively. So Quinn, what about like your experience working with your dad?
Yeah, absolutely. And to very quickly have my touch on I would agree that it is absolutely nepotism, but if I'm given this opportunity, I was going to take it and run as far as I possibly could with it, and hopefully do something with it that proves I deserve to have it. And having seen the film, and hopefully after people see as well, I think I've done my job at that. And
again, like, I think, you know, I have to ask that question because people are thinking it.
No, I would want to have answered it.
Yeah,
absolutely.
Right. And the two, and you really, it's like you've thought about it, and I also want to get this across to our audience because it's already apparently I'm 30 years in the business, right? It's apparent to me immediately. This is an earned opportunity. This is earned trust and communication. It makes me want to watch the movie. Okay, but Quinn, tell me a bit more about working together on the project.
No, absolutely. And I mean, I have been. First, I think there was some element of I've been shadowing him as a director since I was quite small and kind of could walk and stay quiet enough to bring onto a set. And so there's some element as well of sort of my dad's pacing and the way that he sort of adapts on set that is personally, I think, has definitely impacted the way that I adjust as I'm going, and how I sort of run a set as well. But I think there's some element of I had just already sort of seen his communication and his pace as a director. So I went in kind of, and Byron Warner, who is, again, the incredible cinematographer, I'd seen them work together before, and I understood, all right, there's going to be a lot of moving pieces. Most of the extras, if not all, are going to be dancers. They're going to choreograph around me, with me. And so I had a little bit of exposure prior to going in this kind of trial by fire, literally dealing with fire. But it was quite exciting because I had sort of grown up alongside of him, but he had never, understandably, as much as he does love me and wants to teach me and give me an opportunity, not going to let me ruin his movie. So it really was slowly giving me more opportunities to push and see what I could do, and to teach me. Because again, as incredible as my education was, I think there's nothing you can't learn any better than you can when you're physically there on set,
That's it.
navigating it. And so he's slowly given me more opportunity, but I would say this has been the absolute trial by fire. The first actual scene that I was given, again, because of people getting COVID and because we suddenly realized the scale of the castles that we were at. And because there was so much to get through, him sending me Juliet on one side of the castle, him taking Romeo, and then us switching in the same way as there's these songs between our characters where they're singing to each other, but incredibly far apart, but communicating through. We were essentially doing the same thing through that storytelling. And it was quite exciting and quite beautiful to get to have learned from him and then been given the next step of agency and to hopefully, I think, prove myself. He was giving me, at this point, at the very beginning, I think the first week, I didn't have a full second unit on every single day.
That's right. And the second week was we gave you everything.
Yeah. At the very end of the first week, you and Byron came up to me and said, okay, so we are losing this location. We're missing a scene with Jason Isaacs, who I have been lucky enough to meet when I was younger on the last film. And he's just an incredible person, and watching him act has always been inspiring to me. I didn't expect my first scene was going to be, all right, you got 20 minutes. There's going to be sparks and a sword and lots of fire. Go grab the scene. And I think it was one of those moments where the film could have survived without it, but they wanted it. So they said, you know what, we can't get this. Let's see if she can grab it. And I remember Byron had come back to me the next day. And there was a moment where they were like, we didn't shoot this. Okay, I guess we can start slowly giving her more. And by the end of that week, they had given me a full team. We were sort of doing this dance back and forth because of people getting COVID. Part of the fight at the very beginning is me shooting Nicholas Padani, who plays Mercutio, who's incredibly talented, and me shooting him with a double because Ferdia had gotten sick. Ferdia Walsh-Pilo, who plays Tybalt. So he had been sick on a separate day. So we each were shooting parts of scenes that we were hoping to fit together by the end of it. But it was just...
and so to be clear, the particular scene that Quinn's talking about also, it's like 200 plus extras in this giant market square with a battle between the characters of Mercutio and Tybalt. But for days and days and days, we would only have one of the two. And so I would have to shoot kind of through other people. She would then take it out and do that. So it was this sort of miraculous, collaborative. It's so interesting. And again, I've been doing it for 35 years, never like this. The collaboration between first and second unit to ultimately create this vision. I just don't know. I don't know any other experience like it. I've talked to lots of people who've gone through second unit. No one I know has done quite the same thing. And it's just not the same movie without it. So
I've never heard of anything like this, but you know, I'm also from the theater. So it's interesting because in the theater, you have directors, you have assistant directors, and those relationships can be very different. Like you've really created this unique sort of methodology and hierarchy. And I mean that very sincerely. I can't wait to see it. Let's talk casting, because you're making a lot of references to characters. Romeo and Juliet is one of my favorite Shakespeare's. Let's talk about how you did this, because to my knowledge, Romeo and Juliet was not written as a musical, and you're making it a movie, and you got all these extras. And so, how does that work? I mean, are you utilizing iambic pentameter? Are you scouting people, at Stratford? Like, how did you put the cast together?
So the cast was a very unique approach from the beginning, because we really looked at it as two different things, right? So we looked at the more mature audience or the family, and we wanted them to be people who had Shakespearean history, who had a body of work that people would look at them and go, oh, or at the very least we knew had that kind of connectivity to it. But I'll give you a perfect example right at the top of Rebel Wilson, where most people would sit there and say, oh, Pitch Perfect. People don't realize Rebel started in theater in Australia. People don't know she started with very serious work. She did Shakespeare. So it's not as crazy a leap if you know her history. But in terms of her current status, for me to reach out to Rebel and say, I want you to play Lady Capulet, was a rather crazy and wild idea. Infinitely crazier and infinitely more wild for Rebel to say yes, because it was so different than the brand she had worked so hard to create. However, it spoke to her instantly in terms of the world and the craft that she had created as a younger actress. Similarly, or at the same time, we also led with our strongest pitch, where we sent her the songs. And so instantly she was like, I get this. So that was sort of Rebel. I would say, as it relates to Mr. Isaacs, I was blessed having worked with Jason before, and he was a dear friend. And it literally was, oh my God, Jason, you must be in Italy on this date. I need you, because I need you to play Lord Montague. And clearly with his incredible, acting portfolio, he just is so perfect into that role. But then you look at people like Dan Fogler, who I had worked with before as well. Incredible stage actor before he started moving it's where he won his Tony, the Spelling Bee, before he moved on. But I also knew there were things like the apothecary character, which I felt should be more, not just could be more, should be more in this iteration. And therefore having someone like Dan who could really populate that was quite something. Someone like Rupert Everett, who plays Lord Capulet, clearly has an incredible Shakespeare history, on him. He played Marlowe in Shakespeare in Love, but ultimately, again, was a different way in. I will say perhaps the most interesting thing in all that regard is someone like Derek Jacobi, where I think arguably the greatest living Shakespearean actor, period. You look at his body of work. I grew up watching him. I grew up watching Kenneth Branagh's Henry V, thinking, oh my gosh, this man is everything Shakespeare wanted it to be. But I was actually just talking to Derek yesterday and asking him about, why did you do it ultimately? And his whole kind of his Shakespearean arc of his own personal career has always been about finding new ways in, every adaptation was new to him. And so when we presented him with, hey, do you want to play Friar Lawrence? But you have to rap, and the apothecary is going to be placing like his hand. It's a whole different thing. His answer was, so many different windows for me to play with. So I remember I was actually talking to an agent at the time. We were trying to figure out who should be Friar Lawrence. And I remember going, gosh, it needs to be someone like Derek Jacobi. And his agent said, you want me to talk to Derek? I was like, do you think he'd respond? So from the more mature audience, it really was looking at, Shakespearean history, Shakespearean depth, and people that could not make these characters arch and not make these characters two-dimensional, but make them really full-bodied individuals who just simply were on a different plane than their younger folks. On the younger folks' side, I always knew we wanted those to be fresh faces, at least in the public square. I mean, all these people have done tremendous work, writers, singers, dancers, but I wanted them to have a freshness and a newness to them. And so in that regard, we always knew we were going to be doing just basic casting calls all around the world, everybody sending tapes, but ultimately, when you're talking about finding your Romeo and Juliet, you got to see that in person. So we ultimately flew a whole bunch of these kids to Italy where we were in pre-production to do proper screen tests. And I remember sitting there watching Jamie Ward and Clara Rugaard, who play our Romeo and Juliet, and finally, look, you make a mistake in casting, there's just no way back. Right? You can't fix that mistake. So to really see those two people and go, gosh, I can fall in love with them falling in love. I get that. That was them. But equally, was watching the other cast that we had brought out for those two roles, people like Nicholas Padani, who ultimately was like, you are just so brilliant. I need you to be our Mercutio. That's where your sweet spot really is. So it really was a difference between some more tried and true with a twist, people who had done Shakespeare, but not this version, and younger folks who hadn't had that opportunity yet. So it was a fascinating casting experience.
I mean, I can only imagine just how rich, the performances are, the experience, and it's a musical and Shakespeare, and they're so experienced. Well, what about you, Quinn? And again, it's some sort of unconventional what you've done with this second unit sort of structure, but in a way, I almost are you a co-director? Like it's kind of this line, right? So how much did you get a chance to work with the performers?
I was incredibly lucky to get quite a lot of opportunity. Again, I do think a good amount of it came from the sort of everyday hurdles that were getting thrown at us. So suddenly, as things were changing, I got to work with a new performer. I did actually get to work with, I'd say, a large majority of the cast. It was absolutely incredible, and as much as I did direct them, I also learned from each and every one of them. Getting to work with people who are so not only incredibly talented, but so like such vastly deep thinking individuals. Because I had known Jason since I was a lot younger, there was something really special about finally getting to. He immediately, the moment I stepped up, he immediately saw me as his director and began challenging me more than anybody else I've ever worked with in the most incredible way, where he would have, as much as I feel like I thought of every possible question someone could ask me about the page we were working on, suddenly he would think of the one thing that I had never realized or had never thought to dive into. And working with the, I wouldn't say kids because they're all slightly older than me, but working with our kids for the project, it was beyond incredible, not only because we were navigating and going back as well to the working with family question. We were on these sets. Dad and I were there from like 3 p.m. to 6 a.m. just pacing and figuring stuff out every morning for us, which was the middle of the night.
Did you say 3 p.m. to 6 a.m.?
Yeah.
That's right.
It's like I'm doing
That was almost
here.
every night. We was an all-night shoot. I mean,
Yeah.
the movie takes place primarily at night, and we were shooting everything for real on real locations. So it meant being there at 4, 5, 6 o'clock in the morning.
So you're a family of zombies, right? So you don't sleep, is
We're
that?
absolutely a family of zombies. That's right.
Yeah,
That's right.
no, and there, I mean, so there was something, because absolutely, it was very tense as a project. It was the most incredible thing I've ever done and the hardest thing I've ever done. So there were moments of trying to figure things out that were very stressful, and I think it will obviously always be complicated working with family, but I think the biggest upside to it is you those are the people that you learn how to get through the conflict of everything with. So it was always leaning on each other and getting to lean on him, as well as having him send me off on my own. So I didn't have that safety net at moments. But because we were sort of shooting at very weird hours, we all became incredibly close. We're all traveling through, we're traveling in these sort of very isolated parts of Italy. And so I did get to know the cast and get to sort of speak to them beyond just on set, and learning from them. And the amount of times that we were down in the lobby, sort of waiting, because we were waiting for the breakfast lounge to open. They would all begin, one person would sort of sit down like Nicholas would sit down at the piano and start playing and just making something up. Then Ferdia would come with a guitar, and suddenly all of the cast and the crew were all singing together. So it was just
it was very communal.
It was
It was a very communal experience.
Yeah,
Well,
learning.
I was going to say it's interesting, right? Because you're actually family, your father and daughter, for anyone tuning in late. But in a way, like every production is its own family. Like this is a really
always. That's always true.
part of the process. Let's talk as we get into the process. Let's talk about the process of film in general. Right now, it's a really challenging time. In Hollywood, in Canada, internationally. There's some people, quite frankly, who said Hollywood is over, Hollywood is dead. I don't know if I'm prepared to go that far, but certainly there's challenges. I'm very curious, generationally, how do you view this period? Like, are you optimistic? Are you pessimistic about the future from different perspectives? And Quinn, why don't you go first, just to mix things up, and then we'll go to Tim.
No, absolutely. I am trying to be as optimistic as possible. I think there's something to be said about the fact that I have been growing up in the industry as it's been changing. So I think there's a little bit less of a loss that I am feeling for how everything once was. It is absolutely tragic realizing that the work that I'm really learning and trying to create, I hope not, but in a few years might only be seen on somebody's phone. And as much as I do despise that as a creative, I've also grown up in that generation that is perpetuating that. And so I remember when I was little and I would be in front of a big TV, but there's something that was so personal suddenly about having this device on you. And my dad would come down and say, why aren't you watching it on a big screen? And so as much as I do hate the trend it sort of seems like we're headed towards, I have absolutely been a part of it just because that's when I've been growing up. And there's something to be said about the fact that I do believe as things are changing, and I've seen and I've changed with them, I'm trying to find an optimistic approach as opposed to saying as much as perhaps classic cinema might be on its way out, trying to find this version of storytelling that I can do currently. So hopefully theaters and everything won't be going in the direction that they seem to be currently, but I'm trying to be more optimistic about shifting with things as much as I can.
Yeah, and again, I don't know. We don't have to be optimistic, but I think it's interesting to see an honest perspective of people who are working at the highest level in the business, where things are going. Okay, so Tim, what's your perspective on the future of our business?
It's interesting. First of all, in the most parental question ever, Bobby, are you seeing Quinn like being static, or are you seeing a good stream?
I am a little bit, but for the most part, like I can hear.
Okay, it's just what should you try to sign out and sign back in? I know we're in a live podcast, but I'm being the ultimate parent.
Oh yeah, no, that's okay. I've heard like 96 to 97.
Okay, good. Okay, great. All right, just making sure.
You're a true director, and there's the proof right there.
That's right. Total crazy lunatic person. Well, the answer to your question, which is such an critical question, is we have no choice but to be optimistic. That's first of all, right? So like don't be optimistic. Well, then where are any of us going at this point? That being said, and what I think Quinn said is so right. Sadly, I've been watching it change this way for a lot more years probably than she's been paying attention to it. But when every single piece of content in the history of content can be accessible by this device, all bets are off, right? It's virtually impossible to convince someone who can do whatever they want, whenever they want on this thing to stop what they're doing, get a babysitter or whatever, and go to a movie. So it started with streaming, which is the most amazing, fabulous thing and the most potentially destructive thing. And we as, filmmakers have to keep finding ways to just tell our stories, yet the way we tell them has been forever, I don't think it's temporary, forever impacted by the basic nature of our business. And so, even on this film, I would tell you, as I don't know how to be any more honest or transparent. We've reached out to so many people saying, guys, you got nothing to do with this movie, but you're a colleague, you're a friend. If we all don't work together to tell people, go see this movie. If you as an audience member like movies, you have to go to them or they're not going to be there anymore. You got to go to them on that opening weekend because the math has changed. You don't perform on Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday, forget Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday. That unfortunately just is the norm. And if we as filmmakers don't band together, if we don't start finding other ways to reach this audience, and frankly, think about the kinds of projects we're making too, because, well, I am an incredible film fanatic and watch everything. It's fair to say a lot of really good stuff is not for everybody and is not even terribly entertaining. And when you're trying to get, it may be interesting, it may be heady, right? It may be thought-provoking, but is it fun to go to the movies? I mean, I actually think, strange reference, Bobby, but you look at something like Minecraft at the moment. Mm-hmm. That's it is undeniably fun, and people are having a blast going to the movies again. Sinners, very different kind of film, but people are loving doing that communal experience. And I think as filmmakers, we need to understand there is a lane for things that go more towards streaming and that don't require the same kind of communal experience. But if you want to play in that space, boy, you better be broad, and it doesn't mean it can't be great, it can't be thoughtful, it can be all those things, but you have to remember who the movie is for. I always sort of say this thing, making movies takes a long time, it's really hard, is usually very expensive, and it has to be for people. If you're doing it for yourself, write a book, but if we're doing this thing, this whole endeavor for people, you want it to really reach a broad audience. And so I think filmmakers really need to understand the distinction of what they're trying to do, the distinction of the audiences they're trying to reach, and then be completely self-aware of the challenges they face. And as hard as they are, be optimistic nonetheless, and just keep pushing forward. So it's a tricky time for sure. It's a transformational time forever, but it's up to us to find our way through.
And look, speaking of transformation, and you're referencing the technology, AI is the elephant in the room. No. I don't know personally what to make of it. I don't know. Is it going to save the industry? Is it going to destroy the industry? I'm very curious.
Jim Cameron had a great line recently about AI and about production in general. And if anyone's, you want to kind of think about how do you handle big budgets, Jim Cameron would be a guy to talk to. I will use a different example. 3 movies ago, when I think about the cost of visual effects and how high every single shot was, then I compare that to 2 movies ago, where that cost dropped down dramatically. Then I compare that to the movie we just did, where we're doing visual effect. We did not a single green screen in this film. We shot in real locations. That doesn't mean we didn't have to go in after the fact and remove crew members and a truck and a giant light. So we had to do a lot of removal, and we did do some extension on some of the stuff, but not with green screen and not with our main actors. That being said, every one of those shots was unbelievably cost effective today versus even 2 years, 3 years. Now think about, we didn't do anything with AI, but think about the next project. If you can take the same desire to do something, but you need to clean something up in the back, and AI can do it literally for $10, well, okay, how do you negate or how do you deny that benefit to our process? And when I hear Cameron talking about, we can't keep making movies unless we make them for less, and there are technologies outside of AI that have been making it less and less, Now with AI, there's real opportunity there. The danger, of course, is, AI is going to, not just our movie business, it's going to affect medicine, it's going to affect everything. And understanding where it is truly a beneficial component versus where it is stepping into the role it has no place in. It has no place in creating content. It has no place in rewriting content. It has no place in editing. It has no place in creation, but it has unbelievable place in support of creation. So I'm not one who says, oh, forget it. First of all, that horse is out of the barn. It is coming, and it is coming fast. Our job is to understand how to embrace and control our own instincts about what we want to do with it, because we still want it to be from us. Otherwise, it's just some other thing, an app making a thing. And eventually technology may allow it to do it. It'll probably make bad movies, right? It still requires a human being, I think, at the end to process what it is they're trying to convey. And maybe the brilliance of AI will do that, but that's where I think the line needs to be drawn. And I know that that's what every union, every filmmaker, everyone is trying to wrestle with, but I don't think it's a wholesale forget it. I think that's a mistake.
See, I don't know. I think it's generational. And so, Quinn, I'm very curious to get your take, because, you're entering the industry now. I mean, you're entering, in the most beautiful way. But it sounds like you've been in the business for quite a while. You've grown up in the business. So, some people may see you 21 and they go, well, she's been in the business for 21 years, right? I mean, it's quite a complex perspective, right? So, but you are sort of entering adulthood while AI is the new hot technology. And I'm really curious, like, what is your take on AI and filmmaking?
Yeah, it's been interesting, especially comparing myself and more my peers within film to a lot of my friends and everything who are working sort of same age as I am, but in different industries. Even at school, the amount of times that I realized ChatGPT was a thing really late in the game, just because I think it was understood amongst the creatives I was around that this wasn't necessarily something we wanted to, or nor could we rely on in the same way that some of our other classmates could. So I was kind of late to the game in terms of even just playing around with AI and all of that. But I do think I was incredibly lucky to get to watch my father on a sort of film scale, learning how to use it to help him, because again, it's out there now and it's happening. So you kind of have to evolve with it. And so on this last film that my own first independent film that I did, it was really interesting because as I was going through and trying to create the scale that I wanted, I hadn't even realized how cheap certain visual effects shots could get. And so it was because I had learned from him and because he had just been working on this, where he was baffled by the price and the sort of accessibility to being able to design your shots in a way that we never really could before. And so I haven't really used AI much in my filmmaking yet, but I'm currently in post on that project and about to sort of be taught once again how to navigate choosing those visual effects shots, where I'm trying to cut around versus what creatively I can do, because I think there are far more options than there were previously. I just think it needs to be used correctly. So I've been sort of shying away from it previously, but I'm excited to jump in and play around with seeing what I can do with visual effects.
So look, we're going to start to wrap things up. We are approaching the hour mark. I want to thank both of you for just being amazing as individuals and together. But also, we have a lot of people, especially now, it's a challenging time in the business. People are looking for a bit of guidance. What would you tell people? Maybe this is an industry they want to break into. Maybe they're thinking of leaving. Maybe they've left and they miss it. Their heart breaks every time they watch Netflix. What sort of like words of wisdom would you have for people in our business right now? And I'll start with you, Quinn.
Yeah, I'd say first and foremost, something that my dad always told me when I was growing up. And I think it was one of the reasons why he felt a lot more confident with me entering this industry as I starting out as a writer, because he said, if you want to be a writer, write, and you are. And I think one of the things that stands in most people's way, I definitely know it has stood in mine, and it's a hurdle I'm working on getting over, is the preventing yourself from actually just starting to create something. So at first, I do think, in addition to if you want movies to stay around, go see movies. But in
That's
addition,
Juliet and Romeo. And when do you guys drop? Is
May 9th.
Okay.
Be
May
there.
9th.
It
Yeah.
matters. It really matters if you're there the opening weekend. It really matters to us.
And I've also, just in terms of going to theater specifically for this, I have been lucky enough to grow up in a family of storytellers, whether that was music or film. And so this in particular, there's nothing like hearing this soundtrack with the massive speakers in a cinema. And so there's something really beautiful about that experience and experiencing it with other people. But I'd say first, go actually see movies. And then second, if it is something you're missing or wanting to get into, if you don't love it when you try it, there you go. But I'd say just start creating, because that's as soon as you start and like hit the ground running, then you find people who you can end up collaborating with, and hopefully we can bring it sort of bring people back into the cinemas together.
Okay, Tim, and we're over to you for the last word here. What words of wisdom do you have for our audience?
Words of wisdom. First of all, it's always lovely to see your child having taken some of your words of wisdom over the years, and they seem to not have all fallen on deaf ears. So that's always lovely. And I really I would just lean into that further. A funny kind of side thing, growing up in the independent business and working in the independent business, I would be developing projects all over the place. NBC, CBS, this is when those networks actually were networks, right, back in the day. And I always remember people would sit there and say, someone might go, "Oh, so what are you doing, or what have you done that I can see lately?" I'm like, "Well, you can't see this necessarily, but I've just written 4 pilots for the last 2 years, or developed, a 700-page Bible for this project." Now, those were rewarding both emotionally, right, and financially. It didn't mean that they were out at the end of the day. And I think that the challenge for most people, and when you brought up sort of thinking about Netflix even, right, the challenge for most people is what defines success to them. Look, everybody can appreciate a paycheck, knowing I can do this for a living. We get all that, right? And that ultimately is the goal. But before you get to the goal, are you doing the work? And so, there's a difference between going, the work is when it's on Netflix. No, it's not when the work is. The work is all the work that could go on for years and years and years. I've been working on this particular movie in practice for 10 years, specifically since production for 3 every day. It's not like we strike out and I stop and say, "Oh, great, more editing time." So the work is critical. And what Quinn said I thought was super important. If you want to be a writer, no. If you're either a writer or you're not. And it's defined by one thing. Are you writing tomorrow morning? So if you want to be a writer, forget if you're getting on Netflix yet or yourself, go write. If you want to be a director, find that person that's an actor, go put them on the street corner and do a 1-person play. Do the work that feeds you. That's the only way you're going to be able to sustain yourself during this process of ultimately kicking down that door. It is 1,000 no's or 10,000 no's for a yes. But if your focus is on the yes and the release, or May 9th as a weekend, as opposed to this journey that we've spent all this time, May 9th is really important, but the journey is the part that takes up your life. And so ultimately my advice is, if it's what feeds you and if what drives you, don't let anybody get in the way. You have the power, go do it. Stay out of the result as much as you can, because you can't really control all of that. You can control the process, which ultimately can lead to that opportunity. So it's just do the work and try as best you can not to take the hits.
Ladies and gentlemen, Tim and Quinn Bogart.
Thank you, Bobby.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, Bobby. Great pleasure.
Thank you so much. We're Entertainment 411, so it's all about the real information to give people the tools they need to succeed in this business. You've both done that. You're both very successful independently and together. The movie is Juliet and Romeo, not Romeo and Juliet. It's Juliet and Romeo, May 9th. I imagine, is that theaters across North America? Like, where can we see it?
It's across all major cities, across Canada. It's going to be there.
It's going to be
so
major.
Please find it and go.
Heard of it? You haven't seen the trailer? You're about to tell your friends, get grandma, get your uncle, get the guinea pigs.
Mother's Day weekend in America. Let's do it.
And movies are living and dying by that opening weekend. And people may think, oh, they got all these famous people and all, but we're really an industry where we have to support each other, and that's what we're going to do. So we appreciate you, Tim and Quinn. Thank you so much for coming, and I can't wait to watch your movie.
Thank you so much, Bobby. It's a great pleasure.